Very good evening to everybody. I represent Hewlett Packard Enterprises Analytics Data Labs. This is a team that we have created in Bangalore and Chennai with a global footprint, which provides advanced analytics services on top of multiple platforms. So the theme for today's conversation or discussion is around operationalizing analytics, and we have selected a case study in the next best offer in the media area for the presentation. Now, you must have, I'm sure each one of you have gone through multiple discussions, presentations around analytics and what kind of algorithms have been used and what techniques have been used. In today's presentation, not only will be focusing on the analytical technique, but more importantly from the perspective, how do we operationalize analytics in a real world scenario? The big challenge that we all facing is in today's world is while there is a lot of analytics being done, how do we make it more real? How do we make it more operational for the client? That seems to be a big challenge that we are facing. We all know that there's a lot of data in the market in that's been coming out of the engines, the machines, through client interaction, etc. Therefore, from the point of view of big data, clearly we know there is a great story in today's world. There's much that can be discerned from the data patterns. However, let me move on to the next slide. Sorry, I just skipped the slide. Okay. However, in our conversations with our key stakeholders at the client's end, we believe what we've been hearing is that the impact of big data and advanced analytics has been a little bit limited. I was today in a Gartner seminar, and clearly what they said is clients adopting data in their organizations is less than 15% at this point in time. Most of them are only focusing on small scientific projects, POCs, etc. A McKinsey survey very clearly highlights that less than 1% of the clients have actually seen ROI. So therefore, where is the big gap? And in our conversation with the business stakeholders, clearly they're saying that there is a lot of business challenges which require analytics. Yes, absolutely. There is a lot of data. Absolutely, yes. But analytics continues to be a very standalone activity, and therefore it is not getting embedded into business processes. It's not getting embedded into systems. Okay. Therefore, what we are seeing is there is a great love and admiration for big data. However, clients are not necessarily seeing ROI, return on investment on that. And therefore, this conversation over the next 30 to 40 minutes, what you'll hear from me, Raj, and Saurabh is about how do we really make it operational so that the clients start seeing this return on investment on big. So going to next slide, let me just level set where we are in terms of journey for big data and analytics. If you look at the left side, traditional analytics 1.0 was a lot about understanding of data and doing some analysis of the past. And these are basically internal teams working on some proof of concept, some small projects, and trying to discern what really went wrong or what really went right in the past. Then came Analytics 2.0, which is around big data. You started seeing unstructured data from various sources. It could be videos, it could be images or speech, and even the structured data was really very big. If you start looking at the way sensors are streaming data, and so there was a big understanding of what the big data was all about. So the whole concept of data scientist started coming in, right? 3.0, in our opinion, is all about operationalizing analytics. Building analytics into your systems, into your business processes, into your culture. Analytics will be looked at as a strategic asset from within the organization. This is where we believe clients will start getting value out of analytics and start justifying all the investments. So this is an area which, in our opinion, data scientists like ourselves will have to play a very important role, because this is not just about building the greatness. Some of you pinged me that if I could repeat the slides, what I'll do is I'll start with the whole concept of operational analytics. I'll just go a few slides back. If you see the slide now, traditionally, in a traditional way, analysis was done in a corner. People used to work on a few scientific projects, a proof of concepts, and these are all mostly past looking. And then this came era 2.0 of big data, where you started looking at large, complex pieces of data, unstructured data on speech, text, video, images, etc. And this whole theme of data scientists emerged, right? This is where we are today. Analytics 3.0 is about operationalizing analytics, making sure analytics is integrated into the system, into your processes, into your culture, and treating analytics as a strategic asset. A lot of you would have heard of terms like chief data officers, etc. And these are themes that are emerging as you start looking at operationalizing analytics. So let me move on. So broadly, the jump from traditional to operational analytics is fairly dramatic from what we have seen. In traditional analytics, it's all been about siloed teams, smaller POCs, shadow IT assets, etc. Versus now getting analytics embedded into the systems, into your processes, means that you can have much more faster, quicker decision making. So clearly, it's a paradigm jump. And let me talk about what we are seeing and how we can make this happen. Okay. To get onto the operational analytics journey, at HPE Analytic Data Labs, we've identified 10 key process areas to basically, and each of the process areas are interdependent. Okay. If you start looking at these 10 key process areas, in each of those, we've identified best practices on how you get to best in class. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily bore you with all 10 of these, but I'm just going to pick up 3 of these and describe at high level and talk in more detail in the case study that will come up in the subsequent slides. Now, if you look at analytic discovery, in a very traditional world, analysts and data scientists like ourselves, we have struggled to get data in the granular form that we want. IT has typically been a bottleneck. In what we have seen is good best-in-class companies create separate analytic discovery zones, which are supported by IT and business. Data scientists get access to data that they require. There's a proper governance on who gets what kind of data. Okay. On the second, if you look at analytic production and management, this is where traditionally there was no proper, if you recall, where are the typical models stored? They're stored in data scientists' machines, But this is where good companies are looking at analytic models as assets, creating proper versions for those, making sure they are properly monitored and stored in a proper places, etc. Okay, this is becoming very critical because now you start looking at analytics as IP and a proper asset. And finally, third aspect that we will cover through a case study is analytic integration. If you recall, and a lot of you will probably realize this in your jobs, is that most of our output is getting consumed as PowerPoint presentations, But good companies are looking at how do we implement analytic output into your machines, into your engines, into your CRM applications, risk, fraud applications, etc. Therefore, how do you make it much more real across the organization? So, without further ado, I'll pass on the mic and everything else to my colleague Raj, who will talk you through a couple of more aspects about the case study.
Thank you, Rags, and thank you, Marticus, for the opportunity to talk to this group of people. It's a great pleasure. Good evening and good afternoon, good morning if you're joining from other time zones. I'll take you through, I'll introduce the next section to you, which is really about how we did it for this particular customer using 3 elements of operationalizing analytics. So the case study that we're talking about is a next best action, or what we call in our industry cross-sell, upsell analytics for a leading media and entertainment player in the APJ region. Okay. So if you look at telecom industry or telecom communication media, or any other industry, we understand that customer profitability increases over his lifetime. Okay, there are a lot of strategies that companies acquire or implement during this lifetime to provide customers with better customer experience. Be it acquisition, be it understanding customer profitability, be it managing their experience by selling them by doing cross-sell, upsell, reducing cost to serve, and then eventually focusing on loyalty and engagement. There's also an aspect of retention which comes in when we talk about highly profitable and highly valuable customers. All of these strategies can be supported by analytics tools and techniques that we talk about in the area of customer analytics. Today, I will be focusing specifically on cross-sell upsell strategy, which can be implemented through next best action, which is a technique that we do to provide a propensity score to cross-sell, upsell a product to a customer. Before I move on to the details of NBA, I think a lot of people online and in a lot of companies would have done next best action or next best offer, right? So what is the difference between next best action in an operationalizing analytics context versus the traditional context of running a next best offer or a next best action as a POC? Now, if you look at what challenges are there existing implementing any analytics project, and specifically for next best action, for analytics folks, which is the best way for my company. Considering your business scenario, considering the impact that you want, and considering the data that you have access to do a next best action analytics project, an analyst in a company would think about 20 different ways to do it. This opportunity of doing operational analytics allows him in a discovery environment to play around with various techniques and implement only those techniques which has huge impact or better results. The second aspect of it is that customers' interaction or customer experience with the organization changes on a regular basis. Specifically for a media and entertainment industry, and specifically in the TV industry, customers watch, subscribe, and buy things almost on a daily basis. The idea of implementing real-time modeling processes in production environment will help us run analytics on real data and real-time data, which will have higher impact because of the speed to implement and speed to action. The third part is implementation. A lot of analytics just remains as scores in Excel sheets or even in data warehouses. If there is a linkage to the applications like CRM applications or any other applications, it is easy to implement the scores that are coming out of the next best action. The other aspect of production environment and how it adds value to the analytics process is when we look at improving our models on a regular basis based on the output that we are getting. So if we have got an output, we are implementing campaigns based on that output. Based on the response of the campaign, the modeling activity itself can be improved and the modeling output itself can be improved. Give us a minute, I'm trying to move to the next slide. Yes, okay. Apart from all of those complexities related to building, developing, and implementing algorithms, there are also complexities around the business and data. Okay? So this customer that we are talking about has around 3.4 million active customers or subscribers as we call them. And in products, in this case, are TV channels, packages, bundles, as well as services like HD, IPTV, etc., which are on top of it. Okay? Now, the complexity arises when the consumption of products also changes or is different across different users. And Saurabh, who's my colleague, will take you through how we understood what were the complexities in consumption of this particular product. We understand that in this scenario, customers pick up a package, disconnect and reconnect very frequently, almost doing all of this in a month's time. And this may be specifically for some sports packages or some special events that they want to view. Okay? In this case, how do you take all of this consumption behavior into consideration when you're modeling, which we have done through the techniques that we've followed. As we did this, what it meant for our business was very clear. Our business wanted to see an increase in ARPU per customer, along with increase in satisfaction and loyalty through customized and optimized campaigns. Raj gave you a view of how analytics is productionized. I will give you how it was done specifically for this use case. If you look at it, we had multiple levels of data. There was subscription history, product history, there was customer data, program data, application data in terms of his experience with either on mobile, website, multiple levels of data that was available. It was pulled in an analytics discovery environment where we were able to run multiple algorithms, look at the best algorithm that suited the business requirement, had the most optimal output. This was then pushed into the analytics production environment where it was learned on live data on an ongoing basis, the output of which was fed into application and decision management environment. In this case, we are talking about campaign managers and campaign management systems. Not only that, post-campaign deployment, there was a way in which the feedback was looped back into the analytics production environment, and we were able to improve on the model itself. The first thing that we did in this was to really look at the propensity scores, which we developed through analytics model, and we used recommender algorithm. Saurabh will talk about it in detail. The second part of it was designing the whole integration into the application environment and both upstream and downstream of how we will put it in the application and how we will receive inputs or campaign feedback from the application to improve modeling. I have spoken about this already, but just to touch a little bit of detail, we build models in the analytics discovery zone. We deployed models in the production zone. The output of the models was pushed into the CRM and campaign management systems. So hence we used the three elements that Raj spoke about earlier in operationalizing this particular analytics problem for our customer. We'll talk about discovery, and I'll pass it on to Saurabh to take you through in detail. If there are any questions, please put it on the chat window, or we'll take it and we'll try our best possible to answer it to you.
Hello, everybody. So coming to analytics discovery, now I'll discuss first the approach and the discovery setup. So as Raj said, there are multiple challenges when you try to do analytics in the traditional way, because the data availability and the flexibility for a data scientist to work on that data itself is a challenge. Also, there are a lot of collaborative issues when there are multiple data scientists working and there is no common pool of data to work on. Also, it adds the accessibility and security challenges. So that is why you got to have an analytics discovery environment where you can play with the data on multiple POCs, multiple pilots, multiple data experiments in a flexible environment, at the same time ensuring the data security. So the way we deployed the analytics discovery environment for this project is, so you have your production zone where the real-time production data is available, and you create a discovery zone. So technically it can be something like you create an independent schema which is closely connected with your production environment, but with different kind of accessibility and security settings. So we had this discovery zone which was connected with various analytical tools which can be used to do exploratory data analysis as well as modeling activity. So for this project, we used the Tableau as the visualization and the EDA tool, and we use R for the statistical modeling. Now, once you have the discovery zone ready, next comes the exploratory data analysis to do on that data. Now, again, one additional benefit I see of the discovery zone is, if you use traditional tools like Excel and all for EDA, it can work on, say, 1 million data, or even if you use PO tools, it can work on 2 million. But when you have millions of data, like 50 million, 100 million kind of scenario, there the traditional tools for EDA won't work, and that is why you need some kind of specific discovery zones. And here, that is why the analytics-driven discovery zones come into picture. So once you have the data ready for exploratory data analysis, the basic objectives are identification of the right data fields to be used for modeling, identification of the missing variables, the outliers, identification of the patterns which you can use during modeling. So we tried to do all that, and we got certain insights across the customers, across the products, across the uses of those products by the customers and understanding the overall relationship. So you can see there are a few insights for this project also, which we have tried to use in the modeling. So now once you are done with the EDA phase, next comes the model building phase. And basically there are two key levers of model building phase. First is selection of the appropriate model or the right machine learning technique. And second is finally building the model. And the first element is very critical from a deployment or operationalizing perspective. Why? Because when you go to deploy the model, there are various boundaries, there are various constraints under which the model has to perform. So you have constraints in terms of the infrastructure availability, you have constraints in terms of the hardware you have got, because there will be a computational complexity on the model and the hardware has to support those computational complexities. There will be always a trade-off between simplicity and accuracy. So that is why you need to pick a model which fits into all these criteria and then give an output which can lead to a good ROI which is acceptable to the business. In fact, I remember the most famous example is the Netflix example, where the most accurate algorithm was never implemented, and these were the reasons, some of the reasons why it was not. So you see, the way a propensity model or next best offer can be done, you have multiple techniques to execute that. You can do through association rule, you can do through content-based recommendation, collaborative filtering. But considering these choices we had and the decision parameters, finally, we came up with collaborative filtering as a technique which fits all of the criteria, and we can use it so that this will be a successful model when you try to operationalize it and deploy it in the production environment. So I'll just give you a basic layman's view of what is collaborative filtering. So there are multiple techniques in collaborative filtering, and we picked user-based collaborative filtering as one of the techniques. So let me explain you. So this works on the basic premise or basic assumption that users who have similar taste will pick similar options. So you can see there are two users here. There is one user in the left and you have a user in the right. So both user 1 and user 2, they have item 1, 2, 3 in common. However, user 2 also uses one additional item called item 4. Now basically, as they are similar in terms of most of the item consumption, for user 1, if you have to recommend an item, you can recommend item 4 because user 2 is more similar, he has already used it. So this is the whole approach of user-based collaborative filtering. Let me explain how you deploy it through some kind of dummy data. So you see you have a data matrix here where you have the users as rows and items as column. So I'll take the most simple example of movie ratings where you can consider these users who have watched these items which are basically movies, and one is movie 1, movie 2, movie 3. And users rate these movies on a scale of 1 to 5. So all the cells which are filled, these are basically the movies which the users have rated. So like user 1 has rated movie 3 at a rating 4. And all the blank cells are the cells which the movies which the users have never watched. So now if you have to predict for a user U, based on the movies which he has watched, so he has watched movie 3, movie 4, movie 6, movie 8, and he has given some ratings. Now, if I have to give him a next best offer out of movie 1, movie 2, movie 5, movie 7, what is the next best offer I can give? How do I do that? So that is where the user-based collaborative filtering come into picture. So the way we do it, so as I said, it depends on the similarity. So I try to find the similarity between user U and all the other users. There are multiple ways to do a similarity calculation like Pearson correlation, cosine similarity. So we take a method and we try to find the similarity of this user U. Once we find the similarity, we rank the users in terms of similarity. And then we choose a boundary for user to pick those similar users, because if you pick just one user, it may be too low, and if you pick all the users, it may create a lot of noise. So you select the right number of users and you take their weighted score through which you get the ultimate propensity. So you can see here, user U has got maximum score for movie 2, and that is why you can recommend movie 2 to the user. But the problem is, this looks simple as an algorithm, but when you try to deploy it in a customized business environment where the data will be different, you face various challenges at deployment level, at the same time at business level. So if you see the previous example, basically the rating is the user preference function to identify how the user gives his preference. So when we take the DTH sector example, how will you feed this data? And also there are additional challenges in that business because it's a dynamic business where the users, they downgrade their packages, they upgrade their packages, they disconnect their service, they reconnect, they churn. So there is a lot of dynamic behavior. So when I'm trying to deploy this algorithm, how I should address all those issues, and to solve that problem, we came up with a user preference function, which we call the hold score function. Now, the way this hold score function works, it's a function of the holding period of each channel or each pack or each product bundle or each service, as well as the recency factor, that whether he is held recently or he is held in past. So using the hold score, number of months he held a pack or a service, and along with the recency factor, we try to build a hold score function which can feed as an input into the user-based collaborative filtering. There are additional challenges in the overall approach, like the computational challenge, as well as how you work this for a bundle, which is a mix of channels. So we came up with different kind of solutions for that, which we try to deploy. I will not go into detail of all that, but once you deploy the solution and create the propensity score, this is how your model output looks like. So for each user, whatever channels or whatever packs he has never watched, you'll get a propensity score, and then you pick the top first or top second proper packs for the user. And from a strategic campaign perspective, if you want to have a look, basically you can segment or cluster your users in terms of high propensity, medium propensity, and then you have the user ARPU, revenue per user, and you can create those strategic clusters, and then you can come up with a differentiated campaign for each of these users. So this is how the whole POC, the whole work was done in a discovery zone to find the right model. But once you build a model, it is important to test it and benchmark it, because the way a business works, that it needs certain kind of benchmarking in terms of accuracy, so that you can identify some kind of ROI which is acceptable to the business. So we also did the testing and validation, and we did a two-step testing and validation, both the statistical as well as business. And what we found for this, the statistical accuracy was between 76 to 82%. And not only the model was accurate, it was consistently accurate. We did a Kane cross-fold validation, and we saw the consistency was there. And the way we did the business validation, we built the model based on 24 months of data, and then we used the actual 2 months of data to test our model, and we found the model was pretty good, working around 73 to 75% accuracy level. So once the model was accepted in discovery, after building the model, it has been accepted in business. The next phase is how do you productionize it? How do you deploy it? And there our process analytics, production and management comes into picture. Now, if you remember, this was the slide I showed you in the discovery zone. So this is how you build the model. Now you need to push this into production zone. So traditionally, the way analytics production is happening, once you create the model, say on your respective desktops, it's only the output of the model which goes into production system. So what I mean by that, the SQL codes which you use for data transformation, plus the analytical machine learning algorithms which you build maybe in R or SAS, whatever, you never put that into production system. You just put the output, connect with the customer data, and then you work. But the challenge comes, if you want to run that on a daily basis, you can't do that, because the refresh cycle will be very long, because again you have a remote desktop, and from that desktop you need to again build the model, take it to your production environment. So the way we work is basically we embed all your data transformation codes, all your machine learning codes into the production environment. So if you have to run that model again and again, you can run directly from the production environment, and that is where the benefit of production and management comes from. So now once you have deployed this model in the production zone, the story is still not over, because the whole objective of the analytics is to return ROI. And for that, the business people, the decision managers, need to use this analytics output to make a decision. And that is where the application integration process comes into picture. So if you see this diagram, this is the place where in the production zone, the whole analytics is happening, and you create a customer propensity score. So through analytics, just 1 minute. So this is where you create the customer propensity score by doing the analytics in the production environment. And once the score is ready, the scores has to be connected to your business applications, which may be your CRM system or your campaign management system. And this is a bi-directional connection. What I mean by bi-directional connection is, one, the output of the analytics has to be flow to your business application, so that maybe your CRM or campaign managers, they can take right decision and they can sell the right product to the customer. At the same time, what is the response of the customer that has to be captured and that has to flow back to the system so that the models can be refined. And this is a field which is called more of a reinforcement learning. There are various techniques to do that, by which the models can be optimized and maximum ROI can be generated. So this is how we connect the discovery zone to the production zone to the application integration zone in a iterative manner. And now you can keep on reusing the models in production environment, and you can keep on tuning your model by reinforcement learning. So this is where I will end, and let me know if you have some questions, else I will hand it over to Rax for summarizing and concluding.
Saurabh, thank you for that. This is Joy once again. We have a few questions here. We've got one from Ritesh, followed by Rajesh and Akhil.
Okay.
So if you could just quickly go through the chat window. So I think he speaks about which technique do you use to build a model.
So as I said, we have used the user-based collaborative filtering technique to build this model. However, it was not a standard R package algorithm because the business needed some kind of customization. So we took the algorithm logic and we have built our own customized version of the user-based collaborative filtering. The next question is, how did you use UBCF for the first time? Doesn't a hype. Now coming to hybrid collaborative filtering, see there are two things. One is your model simplicity and accuracy, and the second is the time taken to execute the models. So when you use hybrid model, you use 2 or 3 models, and the time taken will be higher. Second, what is the analytics maturity curve of the organization? So if the organization has never implemented analytics techniques and you try to throw them the hybrid techniques, it is difficult to sell them. So the better approach is basically you start with the first building block in terms of their priorities, which is you need a kind of model which is acceptable to business with acceptable ROI, and you build the hybrid techniques in an incremental way so that the business can consume it. So that is why we started with a user base. And as you see, you can't just use the standard approach of user-based collaborative filtering. It needed a lot of tweaking. And when you go in a hybrid mode, that becomes difficult. So that is why it is better to start from the scratch when you are trying to build a customized solution. How different it is from Market Basket?
Okay, I think, what, we have another question from Rajesh. I'm just going to give him access to his microphone so he can ask the question to all of us together. So yeah, Rajesh, your microphone is activated. If you could ask the question to all of us. Rajesh, if you could hear us, so we have activated your microphone. If you could ask the question to all of us. Okay, I think he's just more comfortable with the chat window, so let's just go stick to that. Going to the next question, I think we have Akhil. So let me just go activate his microphone quickly. Akhil, I have activated your microphone. If you could ask the question to all of us, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So when he said, right, when to use a user-based collaborative filtering, I want to know if there is no preference data from the user or which channels is using. How do you start with that particular model or technique?
Yeah, so, typically this is a problem which is called cold start problem in the recommendation system world. When you don't have data because the user is new or the item is new, which has never been rated, then in that case, you never use a collaborative filtering technique. There is something called content-based recommendation system. That is what you use. And it is little different because you work on the features of the items. So if there is a movie, who is the director, who is the actor, then you don't even learn from the user. So that is how you use. So it depends what data you have. So if you remember the slide where I told what kind of models are available and what kind of business challenges we have, that is where UBCF fitted because we had the user preference data available, and that is why we worked on this.
Okay, because this is the same one that IMDb uses to give reference to all the movies and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And could you also talk about the reinforcement learning part?
See, the reinforcement learning part is basically when you build a model, how do you optimize those models? So the model has to learn from the output it generated, how it was consumed, and actually whether it was accepted or rejected. So it is a kind of iterative process. That is what is reinforcement learning. If you want to know more about it, you have various techniques. like Markov's chain rule, or you have multi-arm bandit. These are the techniques, but then again, it needs a separate detailed discussion to cover these techniques.
Okay. The hidden Markov model is also one of them.
Yeah, this is one of the reinforcement learning techniques.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question, Akhil. I think we'll also go to another question before we go move ahead with Rags. I think we have this question coming in from Krishna. So if you could ask your question once again, Krishna, to everybody. I've activated your microphone.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I just want to know, since I'm working in investment banking sector, like how can we connect this with investment banking sector? Because I've seen risk analytics, some financial modelings. This is something into business analytics. So I just want to understand how can this be connected into the picture of investment banking.
Krishna, I think obviously you know the domain better than us, but from whatever I understand about investment banking, you're obviously providing different products to your customers, right? Could be some could be wealth management products, and within wealth management you could have different asset classes, right? And then you could have mutual funds, etc. So therefore, what will allow you to do is, let's assume for a moment you have thousands of clients of yours. It allows you to say that for client A, what's the product that will work the best, okay, and which product he's most likely to buy. Okay, that's what it does. And somebody also asked, how is this a market basket analysis? Now, this is obviously at a client level. This technique tells you at a very client level what product is he going to buy together. Okay, and therefore it is very critical for you. You obviously are offering a lot of products to your customers, but what you probably not very clear on is which customer is going to buy what.
So a market basket will not give you that propensity score against each of those products for each of the customer, which you will get it in a collaborative filtering method.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question, Krishna. I think we'll just take one last question. We'll just go back to Rajesh. He's just sent me a text saying that his microphone is now active. So let me just activate it for him.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
Rajesh, we have your... Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Joy. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for your patience. Okay, great. I think the presentation was very useful. So my question is, you presented the different phases, starting from the exploratory to the reinforcement. So I just wanted to kind of ask you a little bit on exploratory phase, where how did you encounter the data cleaning and what kind of techniques you used, number one. Number two is, if you could just give an overview of kind of timelines for each phase, it would be helpful. So these are two questions from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So for the exploratory data analysis, basically the tools used were Tableau as well as we used R. And if you see the way we did it, one was the data quality check. We showed the data quality check. We had the kind of reports with the business generated on a kind of month-to-month basis, and we tried to tally our numbers, whether it is matching with the data from various angles, like by ARPU, by region, by segment, by product category. And through that, we ensured that the data we had, that data is consistent. And then we try to analyze. So if you see the way you do the EDA, you do the missing value check, you do the data availability check, and once you have the missing value and the outliers, you identify with the business whether you need to exclude that data or are they really outliers. So we did ask the business these questions, and we work very closely with the business so that we have the right understanding through the EDA phase. Also, if you see the basic the basic objective of EDA is always associated with your outcome, and your outcome was a propensity model. So your EDA can be an endless exercise, but you need to keep it limited based with your objective. So that is why we focused on our EDA in terms of customer products and how the customers are using the products. What is the tenure of those products? There will be some channels which people will watch 12 months, complete 12 months. There will be some channels which will be seasonal. So how is the seasonality? So you need to understand first the business objective, and you need to limit your scope for EDA, which is in line with the business and the business objective. So that is how we took this. And in terms of the project approach duration.
Just to add to what Saurabh said about EDA. Now, in this case, we needed to come up with a propensity score. So a lot of EDA that we did ended up being in the model. So if you look at our propensity score, it's a function of recency, frequency, and monetary, right? And that's something that we found out during EDA, that those three elements are important. So I think our EDA focused a lot on the model that we were building, and what will go inside or what will go as variable, in this case only one, in the model. Now the second question was, and if we've answered your EDA question. Okay. The second question was around the timelines. Now, these projects take quite a bit of time. As we said, it is an ongoing process where you do a project in a discovery environment, which may be anything between 2 to 3 months, and then the model moves or transitions to the production environment, and we start looking at app integration, deploying campaigns around it, which is sort of an ongoing process for the business, and for us to look at campaign data back into the modeling. So the discovery takes around 3 to 4 months, and beyond that, it's all ongoing based on business requirements and the campaign process or the campaign priorities for the business as well.
Rajesh, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just one last point of this. You may find this EDA a little different because normally you do a lot of feature engineering, you create the derived features and all. Here also it was like that, but with a different angle. Here if you see there is a lot of EDA around that user preference function. How do you create that function? Because once you create that function for a UBCF, you are done. So the whole EDA was around how you create that function also.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I think let's go ahead with the rest of the presentation.
I will hand it over to Rags.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Raj and Saurabh. So let me just go to the slides. So as you sat through the presentation, you obviously, I do hope you got some ideas on how do you make analytics very operational. It's not just about the algorithm. Clearly, the algorithm is very, very important, but it's also about a lot of other processes, areas that are very important for you to understand as you look at deriving ROI on your investments in analytics. So what we at HPE Analytic Data Lab is that we have created a framework. This framework is around the 10 process areas that we referenced in the previous slides. The link to the framework is listed on this slide. I will ask each one of you to just go and access the link and take a survey. And this survey could be based on if you are a user of analytics around your own organization, or if you're a provider of analytics around your client organization. And look at, and what the survey will tell you is that on those 10 process areas where your organization or your client organization stands, and also give you some prescription on some best practices on how to get to best in class. Therefore, very useful tool. The feedback that we have got from our clients has been pretty good. I will encourage you to look at this tool, take a survey, and get an assessment of where you or your client organization stand in the journey towards best in class in the area of operationalizing analytics. With that, I think I can clearly apologize for the technology glitch in the beginning, but I do hope that you found this entire session to be very useful. And my email ID as well as contact numbers are there. Please feel free to reach out for any questions, feedback, suggestions. We'd love to hear from you of what you are seeing in terms of making analytics real time, making it real in your client or in your own environments. We would love to get your perspective. Feel free to reach out for any questions, suggestions, etc. Joy, over to you.
Thanks, Rags. So if we have any more questions, I think we'll open up the floor for the next 5 to 7 minutes, where we'll take about 4 or 5 questions from our participants. We already have one question, which is from Shiva, where he's asked us about which tool is mostly used for analytics. Is it R or is it SAS?
In our organization, we are open source and very platform agnostic and tool agnostic. So we are proficient in all the tools. This project was done in R.
I think you should worry less about the tool versus what's the business context, what is your client or what are you trying to achieve? That's for us is more important than the tool. But broadly, it's also a question of availability, it's also a question of business context, and it's a question of what you're comfortable with.
Okay, sure. Thank you for that input. If we have any more questions, one second, we've got one from Rajesh again. Rajesh, I would request you to just put that on, to just everyone so that everybody has access to your question. I think you have just sent it to me right now privately on the chat window. Or let me just copy it for everybody. So he's asking us what were the data sources for this project.
Important data sources of the organization, specifically customer data, product data, subscription data, billing data, a lot of data sets. So this organization has around 40,000 tables and more than that data. So we looked at most of the data to figure out which was important for our analysis here, which was one of the first things that we do whenever we go to a customer is to understand the data landscape. So we looked at almost all sorts of data related to customer.
Sure, thank you. Do we have any other questions?
So there is a question on imputation method. So had we used some other technique like logistics, then this could have been a big question because there are a lot of customers for whom the income data and all is not available. But again, the business itself told they can't assure the quality of data because it's not like a banking database where you have to fill in the right format. So they're not sure. So that is why we didn't use those data. And when you work on a user-based collaborative filtering, the way you work is if the user has very less data, that is if he has used very less channels and all, he has seen very less movies, you exclude that data because it leads to cold start problems. So that is why we didn't face that kind of imputation issue which you face in a normal regression-based model or decision tree-based model.
So actually this technique is mostly used in online businesses, and they do not have a lot of data about the customer except what he's clicking and what are the preferences. So that's the reason why we do not need to use the imputation method here, specifically in building the model. If you had built a regression or any other classification model, you had to do those imputations.
Okay, great. I think we have another question coming in from Chandra Prakash. Chandra Prakash, if you could ask your question to the group, please.
Hi, good evening, all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
My question is to, we belong to a financial industries. How can we do utilize this kind of iteration, data computations part of the techniques to reduce the iteration of the certain factors? We have sub-staff, support staff, so level 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of things. So what kind of various ways we can do to utilize and minimize the iterations in the sector where the chunk is very high?
In the financial sector, you mean?
Yeah. Yes. Like in a banking sector kind of things where the iteration is very, very high part. So how can we use these techniques to minimize the iteration and get the results to the senior managements to take any kind of initiatives and kind of things?
Yes, you can replicate some of these techniques for financial sector as well, because you have multiple products in the areas of assets and liabilities, like banking, banks, loans, insurance, etc. So with this you can tell them that a particular customer who has a savings bank account has low or high propensity to get a loan. And you can run these models, and the output can be used to do a campaign for a loan customer, and you can do it differently for a student loan versus home loan, right? So you can replicate it wherever there is more than 3 or 4 or 5 products that we are selling to the customer. And you can create the data model for it very easily to do that. And by customer, you can run and understand what are the next best offers that you can give to a savings bank customer or a loan customer or an insurance customer.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Chandra. The next question we'll take up from Bhavesh.
Yep.
Yeah, Bhavesh. So we have activated your microphone. Go ahead with your question. Well, he's also sent it on the chat window. So if we can just, refer to that for his question.
I am from data mining company which generates customer data. This data is raw. Lots of companies want the data from our company. How they do analytics from our data? I think we'll need a little bit of more details to answer this question as to what kind of data your company generates and how you monetize that data per se. But if they, they must be using one of these few techniques to do a lot of analytics. But we need a little bit more specifics on what customer data you have.
So the thing is, you don't only need to have your own internal data to come up with insights. I can remember one example where a city municipal corporation can use the insurance claim data to find where accidents are happening in the city, and then they can plan to reduce the number of accidents. So you see, it doesn't use municipal data, it uses the insurance data to address its own problems. So there are ways in which the external data can be used to solve some of the reasons.
One of our clients is Tata Motors. Okay, so Tata Motors is using your data to do a lot of analytics. It must be in the area of a couple of things. Probably look at customer analytics, which may be acquisition, experience, retention. It may also be retail analytics or supply chain. There are a lot of areas in which an automotive company can use data for better decision making. I believe that if it's your company which is generating the data and they're using it, it must be a lot of dealer level data or point of sale kind of data sets that we are talking about. So a lot of customer sales, marketing, retail, as well as supply chain kind of analytics must be happening. But we can talk offline. Send us your questions in detail and we can talk offline.
This is Rags here, and the big trend with auto companies is to look at predictive maintenance. How you can proactively predict which engine will go bad or something like that, and actually reach out to your customers and help them with the better offers or better maintenance of their vehicles. It's a huge customer satisfaction issue, right? And this is clearly very important, especially in the West, where your parts, etc., are very expensive. It's not like India. There was also a question on what was the acceptance criteria from the customer and how was that managed. The acceptance criteria from the customer were very good, because the more traditional method of analytics don't necessarily look at propensity to buy at individual customer level. While this technique, we very clearly looked at propensity to buy or to respond to an offer at very granular customer level, and more importantly, we are able to make the analytics more real time, number one, and more importantly, integrate the analytics into the IT systems. So clearly, the acceptance criteria from the customer was very good.
And also, as you know, to cross-sell, upsell these things, the customer used to give the advertising discounts of say $20, $30, because he didn't know which is the customer whom he needs to give the discount and which is the customer he doesn't need to give the discount. Now, once he has these propensity scores in hand, he knows this and he can save these discounts. So it's not only the revenue uplift, it's also the lot of advertising cost saving.
And I think the question around how that was managed, if you look at this industry, telco, media and entertainment, they're fairly advanced in terms of their data understanding and analytics and insights that they generate out of data. So it's very collaborative with the business. We speak on a regular basis to understand business problems, to understand questions around data. And then whenever we are out with the results, we cannot expect them just to accept the results. There has to be a lot of validation, which we did. And of course, apart from the statistical validation, business validation is very, very important. So the approach that we as HPE or HP Hewlett Packard Enterprise take with our customers is very collaborative. We work with them right from start to deployment of the project as well. And it helps because sometimes we are also implementing their CRM system. There is another question which talks about, do you use these techniques for logistics industry?
So are you a provider of logistics services, or are you looking at internal logistics of a company?
Let me actually get this one, right? Krishna on the call so that he can ask the question himself. Krishna, you've been activated. Could you ask your question directly to Rags and his team?
Yep. I just wanted to ask, there are scenarios wherein, these big companies like, say, for example, Google or Tata, they keep on, manufacturing and, exporting or huge chunk or, huge outputs to different locations in the world. So, are these techniques anyhow used, for maintaining the records? Because if like whenever they target different regions, they have huge volumes of productions and exports. So, say for example, even in case of agriculture, if there are exports, so are these techniques anyhow used to track all those records?
If I am understanding your question correctly, is that can we use this to forecast the volume and the volume of products sold and the volume of product manufactured and hence the raw materials, etc. If I'm understanding you, these specific techniques cannot be, but there are forecasting techniques which are available, like time series forecasting, ARIMA, and there are optimization models available, like GANs, etc., which do that. But this analytics technique is specifically for Nextbest, of course, but there are other analytics techniques that will help doing forecasting and optimization at a plant level, at a product level.
Yeah, I think clearly what I would recommend to you and everybody actually is that look at what is the business problem you're trying to solve in that area. Be it iBanking, somebody asked me on investment banking, you are asking me on logistics, somebody else asked about another business industry. Think about in your industry, in your area, in your process, what is the problem that you're trying to solve for yourself or for your clients. And therefore, accordingly, you can figure out the technique. That's it. The technique tends to be come later. It's secondary. First and foremost, figure out what is the business problem you're trying to address. So in logistics, like Raj mentioned, it could be about route optimization. How do you make sure your goods reach fast to a very specific location? How do you make sure you pick up the right route? Okay, those are the kind of things, the problem statements a logistics company, the logistics leaders are trying to address.
So I think we have the last question by Bhavesh.
Sorry for interrupting. My question was it was more from the data point of view. Like you explained, you help in managing the data. So if say for example there is huge data for logistics, so maybe the things are getting exported, but that's a huge data on a monthly basis or yearly basis.
Daily basis, I would say.
So
no, absolutely. Of course, you can do analytics. I'm always saying is that think about what you want to address there. Right? We can recommend the technique to you once you are clear on what problem statement you're trying to solve in logistics.
Okay.
The question also gets answered is, you see the two environments, right? There is a discovery and a production environment. You can build a use case discovery environment with a very small scale, not using the entire data set. Just think about the use case which will be most impactful for the business. You can only a little bit of data and run that and see how it impacts. So, a couple of things. I think one is the use case, as I said, understanding, and then the technique will follow as well as the data will follow. Yes.
Thank you.
I think the last question is we create lifestyle segmentation and economic segmentation of a customer. How does this help our clients in their business? Okay, so segmentation is a problem. It's different problem from cross-sell upsell that we discussed here today. Probably we'll take another session to discuss that. But segmentation helps in a couple of things. One is to really understand your customer base. So if you have 1 million customers, not each one of them are same. So one thing is to create a lifestyle or an economic segmentation to divide your customer base into 10 or 12 segments to understand them better. Second is to target or position your product better and communicate to them. So lifestyle segmentation is done specifically for communication purposes. If somebody is more advanced in terms of using technology versus somebody is a late adopter, right? How would you communicate to both of these groups as a mobile service provider or mobile provider? So segmentation itself can have multiple use cases. Nowadays, we get into the value segmentation, profitability segmentation. A lot of things are happening. We can take a separate session on that, but multiple use cases where it has been very helpful to the customer.